You are in the middle of something ordinary, washing dishes, sitting in traffic, trying to fall asleep, and then it starts. A conversation that never happened. An argument you rehearsed so many times you can feel the other person's tone in your chest before they even speak. A scenario you have run 100 times and will probably run 100 more. And the question you keep asking yourself is the same one every time. Why can I not just stop? You have tried. You have told yourself it is pointless. You have caught it mid-loop and tried to interrupt it by force. And for a moment it pauses, and then it comes back, maybe stronger, maybe with a new variation you have not considered yet. What if the reason you cannot stop is not a failure of willpower? What if the reason goes deeper than that, all the way down to something your brain is doing on purpose, for reasons it has never explained to you? And what if the third reason, the one most people never hear, is the one that finally makes this make sense? There are exactly 3 reasons this happens, and none of them are what you think. Here is what it actually feels like to live inside this. You are not someone who is constantly anxious about everything. You function. You show up. You get things done. But there is a channel running in the background of your mind that never fully turns off. It plays conversations you should have had, arguments you wish had gone differently, versions of tomorrow that may never arrive but feel urgent anyway. You are at dinner with someone, and part of your mind is already anticipating what they might say next, preparing, scanning, running the variables, not because you want to, because something in you has decided that being prepared is safer than being surprised. And what this does to identity is quiet, but significant. You start to think of yourself as someone who cannot be present, someone whose mind is always somewhere else, someone with a problem that other people do not seem to have. The self-talk is not kind. You tell yourself you are obsessive, that you need to just let it go, that mentally healthy people do not spend 40 minutes after a phone call rehearsing what they should have said differently. But that self-diagnosis is wrong. And the reason it is wrong is not to make you feel better, it is because the actual explanation is more specific and more useful than anything shame has ever given you. This pattern has a name. It is called anticipatory simulation. And it is not a symptom of something broken. It is a feature of a brain that learned, at some point, that knowing what comes next is the closest thing to being safe. The machine was not built against you. It was built for you. Here is what nobody tells you about why this pattern exists. At some point in your history, maybe early, maybe during a sustained period of unpredictability, your nervous system received a clear signal. Surprises are costly. Preparation is protection. If you can think far enough ahead, you can avoid being blindsided. So the brain built a simulation engine, a system that runs scenarios before they happen, stress tests relationships before they crack, rehearses conversations before they occur, not randomly, deliberately, because the alternative, being caught off guard, once felt genuinely dangerous. The machine was not malfunction, it was engineering, and here is the counterintuitive part that changes everything. You cannot stop it by force because the brain does not respond to suppression the way we think it does. When you tell yourself not to think about something, the monitoring system that checks whether you are still thinking about it keeps the thought active. Psychologists call this the ironic process. The harder you push against an unwanted thought, the more present it becomes. So the goal was never suppression. The goal was always something more specific. Dr. Daniel Wegner, a psychologist at Harvard University, whose research on thought suppression fundamentally changed how we understand the mind, found that the act of trying not to think about something requires the brain to hold that thought as a reference point, which paradoxically increases its activation. In plain terms, every time you try to stop a fake scenario by force, you are essentially giving your brain a bookmark that says return here. Here is the mental model. Imagine your mind is a river. The fake scenario is not a rock you can remove. It is a current. You cannot stop a current by standing in front of it. You can only redirect it, give it somewhere specific to go, something real to move toward, a channel that leads somewhere rather than loops. That is not a metaphor for positivity. That is a description of how the brain actually processes unresolved simulations. which leads directly to how this actually changes. The first principle is to name what the scenario is protecting you from. Not what it is about on the surface, but what fear is underneath it. When a scenario loops, it is almost always because the threat it is protecting against has never been clearly named. The brain keeps running the simulation because the job is unfinished. Ask once, specifically, what am I actually afraid will happen if I do not prepare for this? Write it down if you need to. Naming a fear explicitly activates the prefrontal cortex and reduces the amygdala's threat response. The simulation does not disappear, but it loses its urgency. In real life, this looks like pausing mid-loop and writing one honest sentence, "The thing I am actually afraid of here is," and completing it without editing. The second principle is to run the scenario to its actual end. Most anxiety-driven simulations stop at the worst moment and loop back to the beginning. The brain never gets to see what happens after the hard part. Research in prolonged exposure therapy consistently shows that the nervous system only updates its threat assessment when it experiences the full arc, including the part where you survive. So when the scenario runs, push it deliberately past the difficult moment. What do you do after the argument ends? How do you recover? What does the next day look like? The brain needs evidence of survival, not reassurance of safety. In real life, this looks like narrating the full scenario, including the aftermath, rather than stopping at peak discomfort. The third principle is to distinguish between simulation and rumination using one question. Simulation moves toward something. It builds, it prepares, it resolves. Rumination circles the same point without arriving anywhere. The question that separates them is this: is this scenario taking me somewhere or returning me to the same place? If it is moving toward something, let it run. If it is returning, interrupt it not by force, but by shifting to something physical. Movement, breath, cold water on your face, not as distraction, but as discharge. The nervous system holds unresolved simulation as physical tension. Physical movement gives it somewhere to go. In real life, this looks like noticing whether you feel like you are building toward something or just spinning, and responding to each differently. The fourth principle is to treat recurring scenarios as unfinished emotional business. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, a psychiatrist and trauma researcher at Boston University, whose work transformed our understanding of how the body holds unresolved experience, found that the mind returns repeatedly to incomplete emotional events, not out of dysfunction, but out of a drive toward completion. The scenario you keep returning to, the one where you finally say the thing you never said, or finally feel understood, is not random. It is the mind pointing at something that still needs to be acknowledged. In real life, this looks like asking, when a specific scenario returns for the 20th time, what does this keep asking me to acknowledge? And sitting with that answer long enough to actually hear it, rather than running another version of the scenario, hoping it will answer itself. Here is the model to carry. Your brain built a simulation engine. It runs fake scenarios not because something is wrong with you, but because something in you learned that preparation is protection. The engine was built for a specific environment. It has been running on autopilot ever since, defaulting to threat, defaulting to rehearsal, defaulting to the loop. You cannot turn off the engine. But you can become the one who decides where it points. The river does not stop, but you can give it a channel. And a river with a channel does not flood. It moves. The mind that runs invisible scripts is not a mind out of control. It is a mind that was never shown how to use what it already has. If this landed somewhere specific for you, there is something else worth knowing. This pattern does not exist alone. It connects to something deeper about how your nervous system learned to read the world before the world gave it permission to. Subscribe, and we will go there together next.